Well, welcome back to another Waynos Fotos video, and this video is about the Lumix X5ii primarily, but just as an extra bonus, I've got the 33mm on my Lumix right now, so you can just have a look at what it looks like. And this is actually at 1.3, and I'm just going to check the focus because the Lumix camera has a feature where you can actually expand it and enlarge it when you're in filming, which you can't do on my Canon camera, so that's a really good feature. So I can adjust my focus here because the focus plane at 1.8 is pretty narrow, and it has a very soft drop off with the focus on the 33, so it's a little bit hard to kind of just see it without having it really enlarged. But that's pretty spot on now if I just look at it with it enlarged. So guys, that's it with me in focus, and I've got the backlight up there so you can see the flare. That's actually got a small modifier on it, and you can see the width it's getting. It's getting right over. If I look at the angle here, it's getting almost the full room. So it's pretty good. If I look at it from a square point of view, I'm almost seeing, because this is in the corner of them, I'm almost seeing every corner of the room. So it's pretty damn wide. So that's really great for this lens because that gives a really good effect. It does get a bit of fall off because obviously the distance to the lens, because it's being distorted, is different right on the edges. Now, just talking a little bit about the camera, I'm filming this in 1080p 50 frames per second. Now on the Lumix cameras, you can't shoot in open gate in that format. I like to shoot in a higher frame rate, whilst only the 6K maximum is 30 frame rates per second. I've checked the 6K. The advantages of shooting in that format is you do get a little bit extra height, and you do get you get the full width of the anamorphic lens. Whilst when I adjust this to the normal 2.39 to 1 aspect ratio, I lose a little bit on the edges here. If I just put my hand there, right here, I'm losing a little bit on the edges, the compressed bit on the edges. So it makes it look a little bit cleaner. When you use the open gate, you can get the full width from lens to lens on the sensor. And it worked out a little bit higher, maybe between 1% and 5% higher. Not a lot higher, but it is higher, and you do get the full width of the lens. So that's the advantage of shooting an open gate, which this camera offers. My issue is I wish they had the open gate in all of the different formats. So you could sort of select an open gate and it switched it on for 1080p, and I think there's a 3.3K and a 6K and all of the formats. So it's not related to the bit rate and all the other features. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that. I would love to have that because I like to shoot in 1080p 50 Hz. The reason why I do that is because I haven't seen any advantage in shooting in 4K or higher resolutions. I've done tests before. I've even put the 1080p on my 110-inch projector. I can't detect any visual advantage in shooting 4K, and even if it is, you can see it. If your content's going to end up in social media, you're completely wasting your time shooting in 4K. It doesn't make any difference. The compressions that the apps put on your footage make a much bigger difference than the difference between 1080p and 4K. You can believe that, you cannot believe that. I've done the test. I even got a test on my channel if you want to go and look at it. You can't see the difference. Anyway, so I don't waste my time in having these big files and making my camera work harder and heating up my camera by shooting in higher resolutions. That's my take on it. Anyway, back to the lens. So that's the lens on this camera. Now what we're going to do now is I'm going to switch over to my Canon camera for my portrait here, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this Lumix S5 and what I think the pros and cons are for it. Okay guys, now I have my 45mm, which is a much lighter lens than a 33, and I've got it on my Canon EOS R3. Now what I'm going to do is, because I don't shoot Sony, I've never had a Sony, I wouldn't even know what a Sony feels like in my hand, I'm going to compare this little baby here, which is, let me show you the name there, you can see it, the Lumix, the S5ii, I'm going to compare this with my Canon cameras. Now, I've also got a Canon R, which feels it's the same body as this, very similar body, whilst the EOS R5s are the pro bodies and they're a bigger body. And I'm going to compare those. And I'm just going to go over there and get my EOS R. So this is the EOS R here. Now this camera is actually discontinued by Canon now. This was their very first mirrorless. And to me, the Lumix, the Panasonic Lumix, the way it operates and what it can do feels very similar to this camera right here. So, but it's better. It's got some better features. But I'm going to start with the exterior and then I'm going to work into the features. Now, if I pick up this camera here, the Canon cameras, right? The Canon cameras feel much nicer in hand, especially the EOS R3. The EOS R3, it just feels like you're putting on a glove. Really nice. Whilst when you pick up the Lumix camera, it feels like the edges are a bit more sharp. It feels a little bit more sort of chunky in its feel and its grip. So it doesn't feel as nice in the hand, if that makes any difference. But my hands are not like everyone else's. Maybe these cameras here feel better to some people than others. So that's a personal preference, but I just wanted to comment that I feel the Canon cameras, they feel a bit nicer in the hand. Now, that's the first thing. Now, the second thing I would like to point out is with the Lumix camera screen, which is basically the same. It flips out exactly the same as the Canon. So that's all identical. There it is there, flips out. Almost the same. Spins like the Canon camera. You can adjust it, spin it. So that's identical. But the screen quality is not as good as the Canons. The Canons, much easier to focus on the back of the screen, especially the R3. R3 screen is incredibly nice. Nice picture, and also gives very crisp image, so it's easy to focus. The Lumix doesn't. And a trick that you need to do in the settings is set the screen to 60 hertz. If you leave it on 30 hertz, which I imagine saves power, basically just forget it. The image is very soft. No good for focusing. So that's something about the Lumix camera, right? You've got to put it on 60 hertz, the screen set to 60 hertz, right? So that's the screen. So the screen's not as good, but where the advantage comes is with this Lumix camera here, I can set the screen and I can map a button to enlarge the screen. And when I start the camera, the enlarged screen stays. So I can then see an enlarged picture and I can keep that in focus much easier because I'm just focused on a very small part of the picture that I've enlarged. And I can use this front wheel here to adjust the enlargement of that size, or I can select a picture-in-picture and also enlarge that. So I can have two functions. I have picture-in-picture, or I can have the whole screen enlarged, whatever turns you on, whatever you like. I can adjust the magnification by turning this button. That's a fantastic feature. With the Canons, it's just a one push, two 2x magnification. And as soon as you start recording, the enlarged screen disappears. So that's one big advantage for the Lumix camera, which then counteracts the softness of the screen. Now, with the Canon cameras, especially the EOS R, which is admittedly it's 3 times the money, the higher frame rates are much better. Once you start to get into 100 frames per second with this camera, a lot of the features drop off. Like, first of all, you can't have the enlarge function when you're doing 100 frames per second. It just won't come on. As soon as you start the camera, it does exactly what the Canon does, disappears. Can't have it on while you're recording 100 frames per second. And I do like using higher frame rates a lot. I like the slow motion, and I do weddings and I use a lot of slow motion. And I also shoot in 50 frames per second, so 100 frames per second is only half speed. It's not 4 times slower when you're shooting in 24 or 25 frames per second. So that's something that I find is a little bit of a negative. The general build quality of these cameras is not really as good as the Canons. The Canons, the buttons, everything, it just feels like you've picked up a more premium camera when you're doing it. I'm not saying this doesn't work. It does. It gets the job done, and it does. And that's just something I noticed. I love the feel of the Canon cameras better than the Panasonic cameras. Now, I did actually buy the S9, which is that little lightweight thing, and I wanted to have that as like a little travel camera, a little run and gun thing, and it was good like that. But what I found is the build quality is not even up to this S5ii, and in the ultimate, I had about a weekend and I changed it and paid the extra and got this one. Now, although I'm sort of having some negatives with this camera here, this Lumix S5ii, we need to keep in mind the price point. Even though there's some things I don't like, the screen's not really up to it and all that, and the build quality is not quite as nice. This camera here, well, in Australia anyway, it comes in just under 3,000 Aussie, and there's just nothing that comes close to what this camera can do at that price point. And it comes with a lens as well. That's not a body only. Say, okay, you might say the lens, you probably wouldn't use it. It's a 20 to 60. I have used it. It's not that bad. You can get some reasonable footage with it. It's not sharp, it's fine. So you get a lens and you get a camera for under $3,000 Aussie. You just can't get anything close to that from any of the other brands. Like you've almost got like $1,000 jump. So at this price point, this camera is unbeatable. And it is true what they say. It has set almost everything settings in it. It's almost like Panasonic. We've just thrown everything in the toolbox. All of the tools are in the toolbox with this camera. So that's a great thing that I like about this camera. And it works well with the anamorphic lenses, and it also has anamorphic stabilization with the IBIS. Now, people talk about IBIS as if it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I must admit, I haven't found that. Maybe I'm just a little bit fussy with the way the images turn out after they're stabilized, but I would say with the anamorphic lenses on, the Canon camera's IBIS works better than the Lumix camera's IBIS with the anamorphic turned on. It just seems to be a bit too strong, a bit too powerful. And what happens is you kind of get this kind of jelloing effect like this in the Lumix cameras. It's maybe with normal lenses, it's probably fantastic, but with the anamorphic lenses, even though you put in the anamorphic settings and you put the squeeze factor, ask all those questions, you need to be really careful. If you move the camera like this, kind of wave it back and forth, it'll just jello. And you do need to be careful. And I shoot off a monopod, I don't shoot handheld. So if you're shooting handheld, I think you'd be struggling to get the image with the IBIS turned on and the anamorphic in this Lumix camera. But some people may be better at doing handheld than I am. I put my hand up straight away. I've never been very good at handheld. It's just something that eludes me. Some people can do it, but it eludes me. I need to use a monopod to get it half decent. So that's the IBIS. As I said, for the anamorphic application of it, I'm not a fan. The Canon one, it seems to be a lot softer, and you can get away with a little bit more movement on it. Now, the other good thing about this camera is you can map every button, and which is really, really good. And the only other thing I don't like about this camera, okay, you can pay more and get it, but it doesn't have all eye. Now, I get the price point. Even this one here, the old EOS R, had all eye, and when you actually start to work with the images, the Lumix images don't hold up the same as the Canon images. I mean, you get them to look good if you exposed it right, it's beautiful. But if you try to push it a little bit, the images don't really like it that much. And I think it's because I'm shooting in a stronger compressed format, a GOP format, whilst on the Canon cameras I'm shooting in an all-eye format. and the files are bigger, so you've got more information to play with. So that's just something that would have been nice to see this, but of course I could have paid the extra money and got the S5 II X, which has that included. So Lumix does offer it. It's not like it's not in the toolkit if you want it. So that's pretty much it, guys. I can't think of anything else to have to say about this than I'm pretty happy with it at this price point. If this camera would have been $1,000 more, you could probably be a bit more critical of it. But for what you get for your money, it's pretty good. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to mention. The image in the higher frame rates in the 100 FPS when I'm shooting, it's almost like as if the image drags a little bit, especially lights. And I think that's because the sensor is an old sensor and it's struggling a little bit to process it. So it's just some slight artifacts. It's not a really big issue, but you do notice it comparing it to the Canon footage. That's it, guys. That's my review on the S5 II specifically for anamorphics. It gets the job done pretty well. I quite like it. The IBIS, I think, maybe is a little bit more powerful. It'd be good if you could actually turn it down, but that's the bottom setting with the anamorphics. But if you could sort of half that, it probably would work a lot better. And the camera is really good, and you can get these adapters for the anamorphic lenses pretty cheap, 40 bucks Aussie. So, and that works fine. And the new 30mm fits on with this KNF concept lens as well, so that all works fine. So I can put all of my anamorphic lenses on this camera. I can view it in the back of the screen in the anamorphic D-squeeze. So really, really nice, guys. So that's my review on the S5 II. Lumix camera, not bad. Best buy for your buck on the market today. That's where I'm going to leave it, guys, and I'll see you next vid.